All right, well, everyone's filing in. Thank you for registering and attending. This is our first official day of the Virtual Rail Nation 2021. I am Joe Aiello. I'm the field coordinator here at the association. Just want to give you guys a quick rundown of what you're going to see today. We're going to kick off with an introduction, an opening address from our president and CEO, Jim Mathews, followed by a welcoming video from Representative Aldred down in Texas. And then Jim and Sean, our Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs, will bring you a presentation on the infrastructure package, what made the cut, what's next, what to look forward to with that legislation. Then we'll do a Q&A based on that. Then we will have our first break of the day. Then Sean will be back with some congressional outreach, which you normally see when we are in person there in DC, based on our day on the Hill. Then we will continue with our day, another Q&A, another break. Then back-to-back Amtrak presentations, first from Roger Harris, the EVP and Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer. Then Laura Mason, Executive Vice President of Major Program Delivery. We have some great conversation there. Jim will then be back with an economic benefits study and results from what we're doing with the kind of the future of the association. And then a very special guest to wrap up. We have the currently nominated administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration, Amit Bose, will be joining us around 5 o'clock Eastern time. Just a quick update so you guys see, because we will be doing interactive Q&A at various points of the day. Depending on what your system is, this is what you might be seeing. There will be a chat function, a raise hand function, and the Q&A function. Sometimes the raise hand might be under quote unquote more, little 3 dots at the bottom of your taskbar. So we'll be using that. Q&A will help us, actually answer questions throughout the day. Chat for the break room during the coffee breaks, you guys will be able to talk, and then. Yeah, we'll go. And then so thank you once again for everyone for attending. And I kick it off with Jim Mathews.
Thank you, Joe. And I don't want this afternoon to go too far down the road without me thanking our small but mighty rail passengers team. That would be Joe Aiello, Madison Butler, Sean Jeans-Gail, John Z. Stone, and our volunteers as well. Just done a fantastic job in helping us to sort of pull all of this together and pivot quickly from August to now to a virtual conference. So again, before I kick off everything, thank you very much to the world's greatest staff. I appreciate your help today and all days. Thanks so much. So I'd like to get started here with a formal welcome, but more than that, I'd like us to maybe talk a little bit about today and kind of where we are and what you might expect here in the next day or two. First of all, I got to say, look, I'm as bummed as the rest of you that we can't be together in person. And with luck, next March, we'll be able to convene at the Embassy Suites in Old Town Alexandria. But I still think that we've put together a really great program for you today, one that will help you fight for passenger rail where you live. And I'm also very excited that we have so many attendees this time around who are not council members. That's great. These meetings have never been only for council members or for elected folks from our organization. It's always been for anyone who thinks and cares about passenger rail, council reps, rank and file members, or even the general public. I would love for all of those folks to come to our conferences, whether they're in person or virtual. You can learn from our speakers and from each other, and that's really our goal. We want to make every single one of you even better at advocating for a connected America. And we want you to feel confident in your knowledge as you schedule your meetings, we hope this week, with your congressional members and staffs. That's why our policy and comms teams put together such a strong workshop program for tomorrow, featuring some of our members who've enjoyed particular success in organizing and fighting in their communities. With Zoom and distancing and social media and minute-by-minute news cycle, it is a different world now than it was even 10 years ago. So tomorrow's workshop is going to help you get to sort of the nuts and bolts of how to succeed in that world. While getting the word out, of course, about passenger rail. So you'll want to stick around for that. Today, we're going to make sure that you have the absolute latest on what's happening in passenger rail, what's happening with infrastructure spending, what's happening with Amtrak's plans for today and for the future, and with your association's proof that passenger rail is an economic engine in the communities it serves. So what better way to make sure that you're on top of the latest than to let you hear directly from the folks who are making things happen today and planning for the things that will happen tomorrow. After Sean, Jeans-Gail and I get you up to date on the infrastructure spending bill, and we help you make the most of the new online tools you'll be using to meet with your congressional offices, we've got a great lineup of decision makers for you to hear from today. First, you're going to hear from Roger Harris, Executive VP and Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer at Amtrak. From the Superliner refresh to long distance investment to traditional dining, bringing back ridership nationwide, Roger's in the hot seat, and he's going to share progress and challenges that he faces in making a better Amtrak for passengers. Laura Mason is the new Executive Vice President of Major Program Delivery at Amtrak. Now, I joked with her when we first talked, she and I, that her title should be Vice President of Everything New and Cool at Amtrak. She's an engineer by training, but her most recent project success was shepherding Washington's metro system through a series of planned service shutdowns to sprint through projects in months that were designed to reverse years of neglect. Speaking as a rider, I can attest that yes, the disruptions were bad, but they were organized and they were minimal, and Metro finished in a year work that might otherwise have taken at least 3 years and maybe even decades. Laura's big challenges right now are Gateway, Baltimore Tunnel, and other NEC infrastructure projects. She's basically in charge of the future, and she's going to talk with us today. Our final speaker of the afternoon is Amit Bose, who is the Biden administration's nominee to lead the Federal Railroad Administration as the point person for the so-called second rail revolution. Amit has moved out smartly at FRA so far. He's moving the agency quickly, and he's embracing passenger rail as an important component of economic recovery. He's consistently reached out to us at the association from his very first day, and he's well known for his ability to really hear from stakeholders and build winning solutions. If you want to ask questions about the coming rail renaissance, this is your chance. Amit will be taking questions from us and from you, and it's a great opportunity. So please do stick around for that. It will be the last formal piece of the day, but it's well worth sticking around for that. And also, I should tell you that he was summoned to a congressional meeting this afternoon unexpectedly. And so I've already gotten a note that he may be just a few minutes late, but he may not be. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. But in any event, he's made a priority of getting from that congressional meeting back to speak to all of you. I can't wait to hear from him. So I do want to talk briefly about what we've done today and what we've done for this meeting. Online meeting fatigue is real. We heard you. And so what we did is we took what we would normally do across 3 days, we've compressed it. We've adjusted our schedule to be half-day sessions rather than full days. We pared back the number of sessions, and those sessions are shorter. We really were trying to be very careful to select speakers and sessions that will give you the latest perspective that you need to be successful in your congressional meetings. And frankly, you can take home and do with your mayors or other folks that you need to talk to. One of the things that you should remember about an online meeting, this is going to take the place of our safety brief. I won't have to show you the emergency exits because we're not at the embassy suites today. But online safety, it's pretty easy to get locked in on a screen. So stand up periodically, look away from your screen from time to time, stretch. We are including more breaks and more Q&A this time around. So we do hope that that's going to help with some of that sort of Zoom fatigue. And also, please keep in mind some online etiquette. There's a lot of folks here, and it's important that If you're not speaking, your camera and your mic should be off. If you want to ask a question, you need to use the question feature. Joe put up a slide a few minutes ago kind of showing you where all those pieces are. We will walk you through this, but it's really important that we all kind of try to use the technology to stay organized, and so that we can all hear each other, and that everyone can try to participate in the ways that they're able. I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't wish that we were all together in person. I do, and I'm looking forward to next March when maybe we will be able to be in person. But I think we've been able successfully to pivot, and we're still making a huge difference in passenger rail policy in this country, even if we're doing it from our screens and from our emails. You guys have done a great job. This staff has done an incredible job, and I think that this program today, tomorrow, is really going to kind of reinforce that for all of you. So what's at stake right now as we begin our shortened conference? Our policy program, this is not just a quick reaction. This has been in place for years. We have been steadily working to form real partnerships with congressional leaders in passenger rail policy. We've been working with the executive branch. We've been working with Amtrak, and we've been working over several congressional sessions to kind of clear the path for transformational investment. And now we're here. Not only investment, but passenger-focused reforms are really ready to become law. And it's thanks to very aggressive work by the small but agile team here at Rail Passengers. But we aren't at the finish line yet. Your voice is even more important now, and it's going to be next spring as the midterm elections loom. We have these tools that we give to you, these online tools to help you send emails and make phone calls. We really need you to keep doing those. And when we send those notices out, please respond to them, because your voice helps. Your voice makes a difference. Please do try to take as much as you can from the sessions we're going to give you today. I think we've put together a strong program. Everything in here is designed to make you more effective and to help you know more and be more knowledgeable as an advocate. We've cut out fluff to the extent that we can, and we really do hope that you can get a lot out of this program. We also have a few special guests scattered in here today and tomorrow to kind of set the stage and set the tone for what I hope is going to be a very productive 2.5 days or so. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So we're going to queue up a quick video right now before we get over to Sean.
Hi, I'm Congressman Colin Allred, representing the 32nd District of Texas. As a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, one of my top priorities is investing in the rail systems that North Texans rely on every single day. That's why I'm leading efforts to pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in the House, which will provide states like Texas with the necessary funds to improve and modernize our rail systems, helping folks connect from passenger rail to public transit as we work to reduce our overall carbon footprint. This bill will also make a historic investment of $66 billion in passenger and freight rail nationally, with $5 billion for rail improvements and safety grants, $3 billion for grade crossing safety improvements, and $36 billion in funds for intercity passenger rail service, and funds to finally eliminate the Amtrak maintenance backlog. Additionally, I'm proud to support the project to build a high-speed train from Dallas to Houston, which received key approvals from the Federal Railroad Administration not long ago. Not only will this plan allow riders to travel from Dallas to Houston in 90 minutes, which is incredibly important, but it's also estimated to create almost 40,000 jobs. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will help make this project, and others like it, a reality through financing mechanisms that are in the bill. And I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to invest in innovative projects that improve our nation's rail systems, and to pass this important legislation into law as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
All right, now we'd like to welcome in Sean Jeans-Gail, our VP of Government Affairs and Policy, to join Jim to speak a little bit about the infrastructure bill and what is coming up in DC in Congress.
Thank you, Joe. Let me just, apologies, I'm just going to share my screen here. Well, this is a pleasure to be with you all. I wish we were there in person, but conditions being what they are, I think this is the next best thing. It certainly is an eventful stretch in Congress, and we have a lot to get over. I always intro these things with that, but it's true. And so we're in a weird part of the calendar. I'm going to let Jim open and talk about the general overview of today's presentation. And then I will get into the state of play and we'll dive down into some specifics of the bill that was passed out of the Senate. It's being considered by the House right now, and that has the potential, frankly, to revolutionize the way Americans travel by train. Jim, I'm going to throw it to you.
Thanks, Sean. So any of you who have seen some of our legislative briefs this year, are kind of familiar with this slide with these three buckets. And so it's worthwhile considering that the names on the buckets have changed a little bit, and that's in part because of all the sort of toing and froing that took place beginning really in March over what became the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which sort of absorbed some of what we've been pushing for years, which is the FAST Act reauthorization. Alongside that, there is another process, budget reconciliation, which is frankly a kind of arcane process, even for those of us who've been in Washington for a long time. But those things together will sort of form the policy framework for rail spending here in the next few years. And then the other piece to keep in mind, of course, is the annual fiscal year appropriations process. And that's going to keep on happening every single year. We're going to focus on today, for the most part, is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the budget reconciliation process. Those two are going to work together to tee up really extraordinary levels of investment in passenger rail for the next few years, and some significant policy wins for us as well. When we use the term policy wins, I think sometimes folks sort of glaze over, don't really know what that means. What that means is a lot of the things that we care about in passenger rail, we can now get enforced in federal law through getting these kinds of reforms into these bills. And we have spent several congressional sessions working with both Republicans and Democrats to create acceptance and receptivity to some of the policy reforms that we wanted to see on behalf of passengers. And a lot of those are in these bills. So this has been a really tremendous few months for the association, and represents several years of focused effort. And but it's important for us all of us as advocates, to be able to speak to these points when we meet with our congressional folks, whether you're going to do it tomorrow or later this week, to kind of reinforce these messages. And Sean's going to take you through some of the details. Sean?
Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to go and cover some of the process issues, just to give you a kind of general idea of the state of play on Capitol Hill right now. We're meeting at a weird time, the legislative calendar. Normally we meet in DC in spring, and then we have the fall meeting in some other part of the country. And it's because, generally speaking, the legislative calendar at this point, you want to be finalizing a lot of the major initiatives, whether it's the annual budget, which always expires on September 30th of every year, or the reauthorization, which every 5 years expires, and again, just on September 30th. So at this point, you hope that Congress has done all the work already, and that we are just in the process of kind of dotting those I's, crossing those T's. Doesn't always work that way. and this year is no different. We are facing a lot of deadlines. There's a lot of work that has been done, but also a lot of work yet to do. And so Jim mentioned, I'm just going to go over real quick with the three tracks Jim mentioned. The IIJA, that is largely done and dusted. It's $550 billion in new infrastructure spending. It's bipartisan. It cleared the Senate. That includes $66 billion in guaranteed rail funding, along with another $34 billion in authorized rail funding. Very exciting bill. A lot of good policies. We didn't get everything we wanted, but we got a lot. And it is being considered right now by the House. They have set themselves a self-imposed deadline to take it up and advance it by September 27th. Like a lot of self-imposed deadlines, it's not real clear what the teeth are, what the consequences are. But they will need to pass it by September 30th because the current FAST Act transportation law expires that day. And at that point, the federal government loses the ability to collect gas taxes. That means the FHWA kind of shuts down. It's bad for mass transit as well. And so they will need to do something at least short term. Hopefully we advance it pretty quickly, but it's linked with reconciliation. I'll talk about how in a little bit. The budget reconciliation, it's just an arcane parliamentary maneuver to pass a bill on a simple majority. The Democrats control the House, just slimmest of margins right now. It's Vice President Harris who is the deciding vote in a 50-50 split. And that means, they were able to get some bipartisan agreement on the infrastructure bill itself, but they had a lot more ambition and a lot more that they wanted to do. And so part of the strategy was, we'll do what we can in a bipartisan fashion in this one bill, the IIJA, and then we'll have the reconciliation. We'll be more expansive. Now, how expansive? Hard to say. No one really knows at this point. It's 3.5 trillion is the goal that they've set for themselves with the Senate Budget Committee. But that's plus or minus a few trillion at this point. And so that tells you what level of clarity there is in Capitol Hill. We do know a few things. 10 billion for high-speed rail. Thank you to everyone who took part in our campaign. We've been working with labor. We've been working with other transportation groups, High-Speed Rail Alliance, among just to name one among many, to ensure that we did get high-speed rail funding. There is this provision that says you cannot anything that was taken up by the IIJA, it cannot be expanded upon in the budget reconciliation. We made the argument that because high-speed rail was not explicitly addressed, that did not count as double dipping. You might hear that. And we were successful in the House. And so they just marked up the transportation provision of the budget reconciliation. It went through. It will need to be taken up by the House. We're a little worried about the amendment process. There was a few amendments that we defeated in committee, but it's possible we could see more on the House floor. I believe Majority Leader Pelosi is going to keep a fairly tight rein on it, but it will need to go to the Senate, and the Senate is really the obstacle here because there's a centrist caucus. This is a Dems only package. I've mentioned before, that's why they're using it to clear the Senate in a 50 with the 50 vote threshold. But even among Senate Democrats and some House Democrats, there's a little heartburn about how large this package goes. Very little of it is focused on passenger high-speed rail, 10 billion out of however many trillion. It's not going to be a determining factor. However, if they lower the overall number of the bill, which I think there's some strong desire among moderates like Senators Manchin and Sinema, then perhaps transportation gets cut. So it's our job to kind of be excited for this, to communicate with offices who we know support high-speed rail and let them know we want this to be, we want this to make the final cut, because these, like I said, these two bills are linked. And so right now we have the progressive side of the House Democrat caucus saying if we don't get what we want from the reconciliation process, we will not vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And they have a lot of leverage right now. Majority Leader Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, rather, I'm sorry, is going to, it has 3 or 4 vote margin to play with. And so it doesn't take much of a break from the Democrats to lose that the votes they need to pass it. And so we're really very concerned. Our message, I think, needs to be, while they are still in consideration, America desperately needs more funding for passenger trains and for infrastructure. We cannot let this thing collapse a yard from the goal line. And that's where we're counting on you. We will also, of course, we'd be remiss without talking about the fiscal year 2022 transportation budget. It's going to be part of a larger budget. Right now, the Senate hasn't done any work. The House has already passed its version, which was very generous for Amtrak and passenger rail grants, while still being short of what Amtrak has outlined as its needs based on reduced ridership because of COVID. So the Senate was supposed to take it up this week. They have said they will delay on that because of disagreements over top line budget numbers. So we are at this point a little bit in the wind. Something has to happen by September 30th. Otherwise, there's a government shutdown that will affect lots of things, thousands of agencies. But Amtrak's one of them. It's unclear what kind of runway Amtrak has once they stop getting payments in, especially now with the tighter numbers because of COVID. And so it's also the last opportunity we have for congressional oversight. And there's been a lot of questions about staffing. We'll get some of those answered later, but certainly we're going to want to have Congress kind of chime in so we'll use that budget, that bill as a vehicle. So that's where we are right now. I know there's a lot of information to download, but hopefully it's helpful. And I want to pivot right now to the specifics of the IIJA. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim to kind of talk about the top line funding numbers that we've managed to secure.
Thanks, Sean. When President Biden first started making speeches early this year, talking about perhaps as much as $80 billion for rail, a lot of people started to get very excited about what that might mean. And since then, we've seen that number turn into 66 billion, and we've seen a lot of people assume that that's 66 billion for Amtrak. It's not. It's 66 billion total. But whether you're talking about 80 or 66 or whatever the figure is, if you look at this table, you can see that these are extraordinarily robust funding figures of a sort that we have not seen in passenger rail in generations. Whether you look at the Northeast Corridor, the national network, the grant programs, restoration and enhancement grants, there is money in here that we have not seen the likes of in really ever. Now, it's important to recognize that this is an authorization. So some of this is not going to be guaranteed. And so it's important for us to continue to push. This is why I say that we've secured these gains, but they're not all the way there and that we're not at the finish line. We are still going to have to fight to reach authorized levels every year. And depending on how the political winds blow, that could turn out to be a problem. But it's very important that all of you recognize the transformative nature of the investments that are being written into law. And if you look at just the Northeast Corridor and the national network alone, we're looking at enormous amounts of investment in Amtrak over the next 5 years. And that's really crucial for understanding why we're so excited about this bill and why we want all of you to work hard to keep those gains secured. It's $16 billion over 5 years just for the national network. Now that could do a lot of things. That would help to acquire new passenger rolling stock for both the long distance and state supported services. There's, as you know, a bunch of ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act upgrades that really need to get done in stations, facilities all over the country. There's a backlog of deferred capital work that's got to get addressed. And the Restoration and Enhancement Grants program would get a significant boost here. And that's pretty important because to be honest, if we're going to be totally candid, the Restoration and Enhancement Grants program in recent years has been pretty much the Gulf Coast program because there hasn't been enough money in there to do anything else. That changes with this set aside. And so again, very, very important gains for the national network. That doesn't mean that the Northeast Corridor is ignored by any stretch. There's the same kind of work that can be done in the Northeast Corridor. Important too to recognize that one of the things that this bill is going to do is it's going to ask the DOT to provide Congress with a detailed plan to spend the first year's money within 180 days of enactment of the bill. And this is an opportunity for us as an association to really weigh in and help to shape some of those conversations, and we hope to do that. Sean, I think you're up on the next slide, is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Good Lord. Okay. Have a little issue. There we go. Okay, so for just real briefly, I'm seeing some questions filter in. We will answer those at the end. Feel free to type them in the question box. You can also raise your hand if you want to ask it live. I think we have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, but we will try to go quickly and leave room here. I will say that we will provide these slides to all attendees so they can review it, so you don't have to worry about taking down the notes here. So not just Amtrak grants, Jim made that point. We have a very exciting new grant program called the Federal State Partnerships for Intercity Passenger Rail. It's a iteration of what we saw of previous program, which was focused on state of good repair, but it's much more expansive. It's not just state of good repair, it's about upgrades, it's about higher speeds, about reduced trip times. It's also about adding corridors, expanding service to new cities. 36 billion is guaranteed, of which not more than 24 billion will go to projects in the Northeast Corridor, along with 7.5 billion authorized, where there's a kind of a 45-45 split between NEC and National Network. And that national network has a minimum of 20%, which must go to long distance routes, projects that serve long distance routes in whole or in part. So that's essentially, this is a hunting license, I think, for non-NEC rail programs. And it's about, are they going to be nimble enough to respond to the immense amount of funding opportunities that are going to be issued by the FRA? We're going to work with them to make sure that the national network does benefit from this. And we will, we'll talk about that more in congressional prep. But, there's also, I just want to highlight, this is not an exhaustive list, but the selection criteria include a lot of things that we've been fighting for. And there were things that were included in the House proposal, which was the prime grant. You may remember us talking about that. Prime grants are no more. However, a lot of the best ideas were sucked up into the Senate proposal. And that's not just looking at the ridership and the revenue as these sole inputs or the majority of the inputs in determining what gets funded, but looking at the benefits of passenger rail, which is why we're doing this. It's positive economic gains, employment impacts, jobs it creates, not just for construction, but more expansively when you move people to an underserved area. effects on safety, effects on a community's competitiveness, a route's competitiveness, talking about reliability, greenhouse gas emissions, infrastructure resilience more generally. All things that we've been advocating for, and they got included in this project because of our work, and we ought to feel very proud of that. Also, just flagging this corridor identification development program. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but keep that in mind. It's going to be an important pipeline for determining what gets funded. Jim, Jim, you've already talked about restoration enhancement grants. Over 5 years, you got 250 million guaranteed, another 250 million authorized. It's a pretty broadly defined program. New onboard service, establishing their service. It has been very much targeted at the Gulf Coast. We also saw a grant go to a project that would help establish a second daily train between Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, and Chicago. And Jim, do you want to talk about that operating assistance real quick? Because I think it's an important facet.
It is an important facet. I think one of the objections that some localities have had, and it's only going to be worse now that COVID has taken such a sledgehammer to local finances, is the need to kind of have to pay upfront, kind of pay right away. This program has a 6-year sort of sliding scale of requirement for local match, so that communities will have time as service starts to let the service kind of establish itself and become successful before they have to pay a large share of the bills. So you can see here, you start at a 90% coverage, and then 80% and 70% and so forth. And that's really significant. I mean, if you look at places like Virginia, for example, where the service is just extraordinarily successful, you need time to reach those kinds of levels. And one of the ways you buy that kind of time is by putting this sort of 6-year ratchet down plan in place. So I think this is a particularly helpful facet of this grant program, because it's going to give all of these new services a chance to kind of get their feet under them and to really establish a track record in the communities that they serve. And that can only be good for sustaining the service over the long term.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Real quickly, there are other funding. These are other funding pots. Chrissy, that should be familiar to people who have been working in this passenger rail sphere for a while. Dramatically plussed up, 5 billion guaranteed, 5 billion authorized. I am hopeful for that authorization level, because this funds not just passenger rail, but freight rail. They've added Hyperloop as an eligibility, which I'm not for, but certainly it's been a successful program. We've funded projects like the Raton route modernization. Second daily train has received some funding from this pot between Twin Cities and Chicago, as well as I believe Connecticut Rail, CT Rail received something. Although I would need to double check my notes there. So don't forget, Chrissy, don't sleep on it. It's competitive because you have short line freight railroads applying for it. Theoretically, we might have to compete with Hyperloop companies now. But I think it's a good project because it's a hybrid. It favors projects that help freight and passenger. And since Amtrak runs over so much shared use corridor, it's just another way to address some of those problems. They have broken out railroad crossing elimination grants. They used to be part of the highway funding in Section 130. We've dramatically plussed up the amount, the 3 billion guaranteed, 2.5 billion authorized. Again, this is all over 5 years. And I think that's going to be something that, again, we'll be competing with freight railroads for it, but it's going to be an important part of the puzzle pieces.
Sean, I think it's probably good for us to explain just in 30 seconds or less the difference for folks between guaranteed and authorized.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So back in this table right here, so the Surface Transportation Investment Act, that's your 5-year authorization. It's subject to annual appropriations without, these are all discretionary programs, which means there's no trust fund involved. There's no mandatory obligations coming out of it. And it will be subject to the appropriator's discretion. That obviously depends on who's in charge at any given moment of a committee. Right now, Senator Schatz from Hawaii, who, even though he's not served by Amtrak, has been very much a strong friend of Amtrak, is heading up the transportation subcommittee and Senate Appropriations, and the ranking member is Senator Collins from Maine, who has also been a staunch advocate of Amtrak service. And so it's up to them, but if there's a midterm election where the Democrats lose control of the House, the Senate, or both, then all of a sudden you might have some Republicans, specifically on the House side, who say, well, we didn't really get an input in any of this. This was all passed in the Senate, and we don't really feel any obligation to fund it. These are operations figures. It's worth noting. So when we talk about guaranteed funds, those are all capital programs, which go towards things like upgrading track, new equipment. But in terms of actually paying people to run the trains and keep those trains running, this does need to be addressed at the Amtrak level through authorizations. The guaranteed funds are from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is the lower half of that table. Even though they are portioned out by year, once this bill passes, those funds are taken from the Treasury. We don't have to worry about kind of whether they will deliver. We just have to worry about how they are administered by the US DOT. And so it's a nice little bit of certainty to have. We did not get the passenger rail trust funds, even though we tried really hard for it. But this is almost like a little 5-year trust funds. And so it's an important thing that we've won. Jim, I'm going to throw it over to you to talk about the long distance service study.
Thanks, Sean. So one of the, we talked at the outset about policy wins, and I tried to get us to stop using the jargon and explain to folks what we mean by that. Well, this is one of those things. We have been, a lot of our members have been pushing for years and years and years to really shore up long distance service. And particularly to try to get daily service in place, where right now we have 3 times a week service on long distance trains. And we were working fairly closely with Senator Manchin's office in the lead, but also several other offices as well. And where this wound up in the bill, in the final bill, was this daily long distance service study. And so we're going to, the study group is going to look at long distance routes that no longer exist, as well as routes like the Cardinal and the Sunset, which are both operating at 3 times a week. And they're going to look particularly at the sort of social and economic benefits of long distance routes in so-called flyover country. The study has to be done within 2 years. They have to look at all options, and we have to develop a prioritized inventory of capital projects that need to get done. And so this really is about kind of taking that next step to do more than just kind of do a study and throw it on a shelf, but to really recognize the economic engine part of our argument about long distance trains. Nobody doubts the strength of the SELA as an economic engine in the Northeast Corridor. But we've, over the years, had to demonstrate to a lot of folks that, well, no, in rural America, these trains are truly a lifeline. And so getting this provision into the bill really does help us to kind of move that ball forward and look at both a daily Cardinal and a daily Sunset, as well as what it takes to restore routes around the country that have been discontinued back when Amtrak was formed. Another important thing to note there is that the way the bill was written, the DOT is required to consult not only with Amtrak and the states, but us. We played a key role in developing some of these provisions, and we are being asked to continue that role as the study rolls out and is created by the Department of Transportation. So we have an explicit role in helping to bring this forward. So that was a win for us.
Thank you, Jim. Another, I think, related program, and this is new, the Corridor Identification Development Program. It's very interesting. It's about establishing a pipeline of projects. We have, upon the date of enactment of the IIJA, the USD DOT has 180 days to establish a program, to identify corridors, to accept feedback from stakeholders, states, Amtrak, et cetera. And then once that program is set up, they have a year to come up with a list of designated corridors and project sequencing, how project phasing, the potential projects, the cost of those projects, as well as how they would kind of rank based on limited funds with any given year, the projects that they will fund based on available funding. So a lot of opportunities to lobby, both for the program construction, but also individual corridors. And there's been a lot of, in terms of the selection criteria, a lot of things that we have fought for. And I'm going to hit this point again: anticipated positive economic benefits, employment impacts, benefits to rural communities specifically, whether it's part of a regional or interregional passenger rail study, which we have taken part in and helped steer. So a lot of good things there. And it's going to be, I think, one of the key documents in determining what gets funded. Worth mentioning, corridor definition: it's new intercity passenger rail routes of less than 750 miles or enhancement thereof. However, bullets number 3 and 4, increase service frequency or upgrade existing long distance lines, or restoration of service over an intercity passenger railroad formerly operated by Amtrak, which includes a number of discontinued long distance routes. And so we should all feel pretty good about ourselves for getting national network eligibility included. And I know this addresses some of the issues that have been raised by members in the field about feeling like that 750 mile distinction was a barrier. Well, this shows that the US DOT is going to have to consider those. And Jim, maybe if you wrap up with this, I do want to leave time for questions. I'm going to cut off the high-speed rail, but this is an important one. I want you to have a chance to talk about it.
Sure. This was one of those things that it would be easy to dismiss as kind of griping. But the fact is that being on the train involves a passenger experience, whether it's the seats, whether it's sleeping accommodations or food and beverage. All of those things are about your experience on the train and whether you'll return. One of the things that has had terrible consequences, I think, over the long term, was a requirement that food and beverage had to break even in a given fiscal year. Turned a lot of people into all kinds of pretzel shapes to try to make that work. Amtrak has done a really phenomenal job here in just the past few months in putting things in place to restore traditional dining. The initial take for some of the trains that have seen the new food items has been very strong. Folks are really pleased with the food that's out there. And that's great. That's great for a lot of reasons. It's great in part because we fought very hard for that. But it's also great because that's part of why people will take the train, and it helps to increase the value proposition of the train. We have been pushing on this particular issue for some time, and one of the results was this bill includes congressional direction to establish a working group to develop recommendations to improve onboard food and beverage services. And the good news is Amtrak really wants to do that. They want to improve the services. It's helpful to take out that break-even requirement, and it's helpful to create a framework, a legislative framework to kind of guide that effort. Once again, we're included in the language of that section as well. Having worked on this issue for a long time, we are expected to participate in that working group, and that group has to be created within 180 days of enactment of the bill. And then within 1 year, the group has to have its recommendations published. So it's going to look at ridership. It's going to look at passengers traveling on long distance routes, state supported, NEC, passenger survey data, beverage, the whole gamut. So this started out in some ways as complaints about food and beverage, but I think that the bill very smartly recognizes that the entire passenger experience, whether you're talking about long distance trains or state supported trains or the Northeast Corridor, that's really important for people using the train and returning to the train. And so this is going to cover a broad range of inputs, and we have a role in providing those inputs. So that's another win for us in this bill. Sean?
Thanks, Jim. So real quickly, we've had a lot of reforms on to other parts of the rail world. Composition of Amtrak's board of directors. We will have 2 from Northeast Corridor, 2 from long distance routes, and 2 from state supported routes, as well as requiring annual engagement with the general public, disabled passenger community, and Amtrak employees, as well as some. We'll talk more about some of these other things: Interstate Rail Compact, Surface Transportation Board. So I'm going to go to questions right now, and yeah. So you can answer. If we don't get to your question today, feel free to email us. But I will start with Steve Vagnosi's question. What are the 2 chances these 2 bills get separated? Your guess is as good as mine. I would think not great. I believe we've seen some very strong messaging from both the White House as well as Senate and House leadership that budget reconciliation will be a necessary part of seeing the bipartisan bill passed. Now, I believe the scope and the size of that budget reconciliation package is very much a live question. And so we could see high-speed rail and transportation, frankly, in total, just get eliminated if it drops below a certain overall size. I don't specifically know the inputs, and this is all being done in kind of backroom negotiations. So it's tough to say, but other than making a really concerted effort to make sure that rail passengers are saying, we want high-speed rail and we want passenger rail to be part of the reconciliation, is very little we can do at this point.
Let me just jump in and add to that, to Steve's question. Right now, we're not seeing anything or hearing or seeing any smoke signals that there's any likelihood that these would be separated. It's a roll of the dice whether it could or could not. But right now, we're not seeing anything like that, and that's why Sean is trying to foot stomp for you guys the importance of making sure that members of Congress know that these transportation priorities are important to us, and that high-speed rail is important to us, and some of the rest. Because there's been a lot, particularly over the past weekend, there's been a lot of posturing about the dollars, and so this is, when I say that this is all still very much at risk, we're not kidding around. So it's important for you to really do make that point when you talk to your congressional delegations. Sorry, John.
No worries. Brad asks, is there monies for repurchasing more Amtrak and our state owns rights of way in order to avoid the hostility to class ones as much as possible? Right of way acquisition, it was included in budget reconciliation as part of the high speed rail funds, as well as Fed state partnership grant program. That's expensive. And so I'm not sure there's enough funding to do wholesale acquisition of rights of way, but they're certainly eligible. Steve Roberts asked, will all the long distance routes studied be on the same timeline for study completion date, or will the current tri-weekly trains be someone? I didn't get the last part of that question because they marked it answered. We don't know. It's the US DOT. We will certainly have conversations. Hopefully I don't think we'll get any answers from Deputy Administrator Bose today, but we will certainly be in contact with the US DOT and the FRA as once the bill is passed, knock on wood, to ensure to answer those questions and also just to take part. They designate non-profit organizations representing rail passengers as one of the eligible participants in the study. I do think it's nice that this study is taking place in the US DOT rather than in Amtrak, because the US DOT is by statute required to be a little bit more transparent. I think we are, so question is, Steve Strauss asked, grade crossing elimination funding, can this be used to help seal passenger rail corridors? Yes, that is my understanding. It can be used to seal rail corridors. Okay, sorry. Dave Randall, is there any chance that Maddie Butler can participate in the FMB working group? I believe, I'd say with a high degree of confidence, Rail Passengers Association will be part of it. So Maddie Butler will definitely be providing input and participating in that process for the food and beverage. Steve Strauss asked, which bill includes the Amtrak policy changes? Those are all in the IIJA. Reconciliation by rule can only affect budgetary and spending. Andrew Lodrigus, Director, welcome. What chance do we have of steering? Okay, what chance do we have of steering Senate Commerce to change the REG program, Restoration Enhancement Grants program, so that it does not provide 80% funds in year one, 80-60 in year two? I think it's 90% in year one. So, okay. The answer is very high because they already did it. They went from a 3-year horizon to a 6-year horizon, as I think Jim mentioned. So it starts out at 90, it goes down to 30. And hopefully that answers your question. Joe, how are we doing on time? I don't want to go over here.
Sean, you have about 2 minutes for a couple more questions.
Okay. Kim Whittemore asked, hopefully I said that right, are representatives from the field eligible, able to join the working group as well? Well, we will certainly be constructing forms of engagement as we go forward. Rail Passengers will have 1 seat on the board, on the working group rather. And so, but we will obviously, anytime there's a solicitation for feedback, we will go to our members, we'll go to our supporters, we will go to the council and hear what they have to say, and then make sure that feedback is submitted to the working group. So it will be, yes, absolutely. Members, supporters will be part of the conversation. William Porter asked, could you discuss how the $10 billion for high-speed rail will be administered? Yes, it will be administered by the US DOT. It will there's a number of provisions. I don't have them in front of me. I do know that there are speed requirements, 160 for dedicated rights of way, and I believe something around like 136 for these are not round numbers. They correspond to kilometers per hour. So it's something like 136 for shared use. It will be administered by the USDOT. There will be a couple. It's a new program in a lot of ways, so it's still a little hazy as to what the administrative structure will look like. But there are some benchmarks about, it has to serve the center of a major metropolitan area, which I think are designed to kind of make sure that doesn't end up funding any stranded assets. And I'm happy to answer that more. If I have the statutory language in front of me, I'm happy to answer that in more detail.
So it looks like we're out of time, but I do want to just mention to everybody, Joe will correct me if I'm wrong, but we can gather up all the Qs that are in the Q&A box. So even if we did not get to them during this, we can make sure that folks get answers to everything that was put into the Q&A box. And so we can share those with folks as we go along.